Okay, we've talked a lot about old and new coming together. We've talked a lot about the changing nature of agencies. We've talked about the changing nature of media behemoths. So actually, very nicely, something that Laurent mentioned there is that trust in brands. So people are trusting brands. But actually, we've got a great session next, which is all about how social media is driving that kind of trust in brands and making people trust that power of trust and how it works and how it's scaled. So to discuss that, we have two great guys to come on stage. We have Doug Ray, who is the Global President of Carat. Come on up, a round of applause, please. And Sanjay Nazerali, who's the Global Chief Strategy Officer for Dentsu Aegis Network. Take it away, Ben.
Thank you. How are you guys doing out there? Are you still awake? It's getting late in the day, I know, and there's cocktails that are probably just about an hour and a half away, so.
Picture the scene. This is a couple of months ago, and it's in New York City. And global media silver fox Doug Ray is getting out of a taxi. And he loses his wallet.
It's true.
Now, fast forward to a scene in Rome, a warm, balmy spring evening, last evening, in fact. And we're going to a restaurant with an extremely pleasant and lovely client. Hello, Ben. Sanjay, at this point, is paying for a taxi. Thematic resonance here. And he flashes his wallet, at which Doug says,
I said, oh, that's a really nice wallet. And I noticed the color, and I had seen, actually, this before. And I said, well, what wallet is that? Who makes that?
It's a Lorna, Doug, by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen.
Very exciting. And so Sanjay, being, as I understand it from him, a posh Brit, certainly he actually has pretty good taste in wallets. And looking at the wallet, I decided at that point I'd probably stop off in the airport on the way back to the US tonight or tomorrow and actually pick up one of those wallets. And so I think the point of that story is actually that I trust Sanjay, I trust his taste in wallets, and we just happen to be at the right moment at the right time to talk about that. But I've never actually seen an advertisement by Lorna, and I haven't been to their store as well. Which actually leads us to our first point, is the most important driver of commerce today is in fact trust. And if we think about that, Sanjay, right, we know that we trust banks actually to have the assets to cover the investments that we make in them. We trust that the stock price of companies actually represent the value of those companies. And we trust brands, or at least we used to trust brands, to tell us about the benefits and the equity that and the promise that they have for consumers.
Indeed, but trust is a difficult and shape-shifting thing. And it's morphed, and it's not what it used to be. And once upon a time, it was quite easy, because we used to trust in church, state, and monarchy. And life was easy, because how did they speak to us? It was through laws, regulation, fear of eternal damnation. Life was easy.
And then you had the 1950s, and the television was born, and suddenly it was the era of Mad Men, and there were beautiful 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute commercials that came out, and we trusted brands, and we trusted the story that those brands told in television.
And then social media decided to pee on that bonfire. And what happened through social media is people suddenly were able to trust in people at a scale that had never been seen before. And the interesting thing was, so how do they talk? Well, actually, they talk to each other. It's called conversation. It's about us talking to each other.
And I think the interesting thing is, this is some Nielsen data here as well, is that we know this, actually, that people actually are working harder than brands and working harder than advertising. And it's not just something, the word of mouth that people have over a wallet. Actually, the digitization of media is also enabling those conversations to be persuasive about brands as well.
The great irony, of course, is this lovely conversation stuff is happening, and what do? We go and take legacy models of advertising and just lob them into this new world of conversation, assuming that they're actually going to work. So, but before I start dissing ads on social networks and ads in online forums, all of that, hands up everyone who voluntarily has clicked on a banner ad in the last week.
Okay, a couple.
Oh my God, someone really has.
And that was on purpose,
amazing.
Right? All right, now, how many of you have actually commented on a picture or a video in the last 7 days? So a very different value exchange in terms of what we expect in the digital space. And that's because we know people actually drive brand action. So this was really interesting. We actually looked at a piece of research across, in this case, 3 different markets. We looked at 3 different business or communication tasks for a hypothetical brand. We looked at 3 different target audiences. And then we looked at this against the decision-making process in 3 different categories. And then we looked at what are the communication channels or the touch points that actually influence awareness of this consumer in this category, or consideration, or an action, in this case, trial. And what you see across the board is actually after you drop down past the 1 or 2 first most influential touch points, you start to see some differences in there. But what we actually see is that people are the key influencers, regardless of the communication tasks, the category, or the consumers.
Now, you could argue that we've always trusted our friends. Well, we've always trusted our friends more than brands. And so that's clearly going to come up top. We've always trusted our neighbors. But when was the last time we had 3.4 billion neighbors? It's quite a long time.
Yep. And I think the fact that we actually, and I've heard numbers thrown out, we've talked about the number of connected devices and whether or not this is the right number or not. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that we are more connected than we've ever been as individuals. And what that connection actually starts to do is connected devices means that as individuals that we're much more connected up, which then means the conversations that we're having around our interests and our passions and brands are also connected. And therefore, the culture that influences our lives are much more available for us to understand and therefore start to create some value within those cultural exchanges.
So cultural exchanges, it might sound a bit schmancy, a bit media, but it's not. Have a look at that lovely picture on the right, which is of a pair of trainers. Now this is our friend and colleague J.R. Linden having a weekend in Berlin in which he's sporting these extremely natty white trainers. And he's got a friend of his called Mike D, who's saying, they're really great trainers. Sounds completely normal. It sounds like a classic Twitter/Instagram exchange, doesn't it? Except they're 2 exciting, I guess for some people, really scary facts about this. 1, that conversation is happening between JR and Mike D in the context of a weekend in Berlin. It has nothing to do with a shoe shop or a YouTube feed about shoes. It's in culture, not in category.
And I think the other thing that's in there is that there's no conversation with the brand. So the brand isn't actually participating in that cultural exchange that's happening. Now, what's really interesting is this isn't just a phenomenon that's happening within tweets that are happening between consumers. This is some interesting data from Zephyr. And this is data looking across YouTube, and they're tracking almost every single piece of every single video that's ever been produced on YouTube. And whether or not you're looking at PlayStation, or you're looking at Barbie, or you're looking at a consumer electronics product, whatever that is, we see the same thing happen over and over and over again, which is about 90% of the content that is uploaded into YouTube, and it's not just YouTube, but I'm using this as an example, about 90% of that content is actually produced by users. It's produced by fans, by advocates, by people who admire the brand, and only 10% of that content is being developed by brands. So the opportunity is tremendous. How do we start to take advantage of that opportunity through the understanding of data, and more importantly, media agencies' responsibility, I think, in terms of helping to bring together clients with the right technology partners as well.
So PlayStation really did do that. They embraced it, and Doug's going to talk about that. We wanted to give you 3 very quick case studies. These are not laborious. They're very exciting. 3 case studies of brands that have really lent into culture and who've taken this idea of moving from culture to category very much as their new marketing mandate.
Yep. So the first one I want to just briefly talk about is PlayStation. And so if you think about the fact that, again, a huge amount of content is being created by consumers about the category, about the brand, and about just the overall love for gaming alone, you can start to understand that there's possibly an opportunity here for a brand that was actually coming out with, a couple of Christmases ago, the biggest launch in the last 7 years in terms of the new PS4. And they were also up against a formidable competitor that historically had outspent them significantly. So what do you do with that? What do you do when you're up against them? There's 2 things that were important for them to do. One was ensure that they were actually programming those advocates, those influencers, those individuals that were already engaging in the category by giving giving them some assets. And those assets were very simple, which is giving them two hashtags. One was PS4 Share, and the other one was Greatness Awaits, which was the campaign itself. Now, why is that important? It's important because as consumers start to engage with either the assets from the brand or they're just actually uploading Instagram photos of their favorite gaming activities, maybe their buddies sitting around and playing a game, if they're using these hashtags, we can then use technology companies like a Rebel Mouse, important to Mondelez, or a Livefire in this case, to actually aggregate and curate all of the conversations across all social platforms and then turn those earned media assets into owned media. So in this case, instead of running traditional brand advertising in display ads, what the display ads actually were are aggregated, visualized social media. So consumers that are engaging in the category and actually incorporating the brand into the category, suddenly they were getting a list of what were the top 10 trending games, all dynamically generated within the banner itself. They could actually dynamically see pictures that were being uploaded from gamers on Instagram, which is that middle one. And then on the far right side, those are all videos that are also being uploaded with those hashtags from YouTube. So again, how they could leverage those influencers to create really meaningful value. And Business Insider ultimately called this the most successful launch in game console history.
So you've got a great example of harnessing massive numbers of conversations and pulling them together and serving them out. But what happens when you want to harness one event that already happens to exist and that's really emotive? It's so damn risky. Yesterday was Mother's Day. 366 days ago, MasterCard did something extraordinary. It was risky because, come on, this is quite an emotional, well, certainly for some of us, it's an extremely emotional day. And the idea of a brand trying to barge in and co-opt my relationship with my mother would be no, 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 no. So they managed to do this, adding genuine value to the Mother's Day experience. They used their priceless platform as a way for love for mothers just to be expressed. So what they did, in short, this is a huge case. I'm just going to give you some pithy bits. They find a family, the mum, lots of kids around her. Okay? Nice little surprise, take mum to the cinema to watch a film. And then during the film, suddenly a different film starts. And it's a beautifully made collection of the photographs, the videos, the memories, and personal messages of love that have been recorded by the entire family. Now, this was so powerful and so moving, genuinely adding value to the Mother's Day experience. It was one conversation, fine. But in virtually no time, that was 10 million YouTube impressions with people essentially taking it on, co-opting it, and doing the same thing. So this is a really powerful example of how to get to big numbers.
Yeah, and I love that because, if you think about Priceless, and this is a platform, this is an identity that's been around for, I think, about 18 years. And at the beginning of that relationship and at the beginning of that campaign, it was really about MasterCard telling people what were the priceless experiences. And I think today what the opportunity is people are telling MasterCard what those priceless experiences are. So it's the responsibility of the brand to how do you engage consumers in that dialogue around the moments that are most valuable for them in culture. So the final one is Macy's. And Macy's is probably the most iconic US retailer. They're famous for their Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. They're famous for the fireworks that they do at 4th of July. What they're not famous for, however, is having cutting-edge fashion for millennials. So what they ended up doing is reaching out to an individual, an influencer, who actually was quite trusted amongst millennials, and looked to her influence to actually create a program that would allow them to earn the respect and to have the conversations that are really important around fashion, shopping, and that millennial lifestyle. And so they tapped into Jenny May. And back in 2013, Jenny May had about just less than 1 million views on YouTube. She had about 100,000 tweets or followers on Twitter, and she had about 80,000 followers on Instagram as well. And so this was really about leveraging her social network and creating an 11-episode series where we were pitting potential stylists against one another, completely fueled by social media, leveraging the apparel from Macy's that appealed to the millennials, but importantly, right, The data helped us understand that Jenny May was the right individual because of her social following amongst millennials, but then the technology was what made every single one of those videos absolutely shoppable. So as that video was playing, millennials could shop that video for the looks that they were seeing online.
That's the commonality that all these three cases have. They're very, very different in style, in audience, but you start with people. And you start with trying to understand people, not consumers, people, humanity. And that's what data now increasingly enables you to do. And then you develop out of that content, amazing content, which is now what only technology can actually enable you to serve out in that way.
And I loved, John and Lindsay were talking about this, which is how media agencies are now helping to fuel the briefs for creative agencies. And somebody asked, I think it was someone from McCann asked a really great question. And it really is about the collaboration, the coming together. It is not a competitive situation. And so I think that our ability to start to use data in a way to inform and understand the cultures that people live in is really valuable. I think that the risk right now, where we are in sort of that journey, is we're jumping on the newsroom bandwagon, which is, we need to have a live newsroom that's following all the tweets, all the conversations, all the socials, all the searches that are happening. And the problem with that, the problem with that is most of our clients spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to understand their most valuable consumer segments. So they're doing segmentation, they're using social mining, they're using their CRM to actually understand those most valuable consumers. So when you look at just search and social, you're aggregating all of the volume that includes all of those customers that actually may not be that relevant for you. And what ends up happening is you end up chasing the social meme of the moment.
And those social memes give you no competitive advantage because everyone is going to go running after them. And in fact, worse than that, they're incredibly short-termist. Most of them melt quicker than the ice in an ice bucket challenge, if anyone still remembers that. So the big challenge then becomes, how do you move away from just trying to co-opt those big, fat social memes and start to get to people at an individual level, at a personal level? How do you get up close and personal with them using data?
And I think that's the huge opportunity. And I think this is the fundamental shift that a lot of media agencies are going through. It's certainly one that the Dentsu Aegis network and Carat is going through right now, which is, consumers now are leaving breadcrumbs all over the place in the social space. Every time they engage with a campaign, they leave some breadcrumbs. Every time that they actually converse or comment on something, they leave breadcrumbs. The problem right now is most of those breadcrumbs are actually in the form of cookie data or some other digital unique identifier, and there's no common currency for that. So this becomes very important for agencies to start to look at how they can become not a single source, because there are no single sources anymore, and we've tried that before, but a central source. How can we start to understand consumers through bringing together an agency's own first-party data and then matching that up with existing third-party data as well? So very specifically, think about that consumer segment that a client has spent lots and lots of money to go out and identify, and they're doing R&D and product development, all sorts of things, and then it falls apart when they get to communications. Right? But if we can actually understand those breadcrumbs that they're leaving, and we can actually capture those breadcrumbs, and then the relationship that media agencies have with some of these large media companies, we can start to bridge those consumer audiences through the breadcrumbs with the data that those companies have, and we can start to now understand interests, affiliations, and beliefs of consumers, and we can start to paint a picture of what their culture, what the culture is that they live within.
Dashboards, Doug.
Yeah, I know.
Dashboards. So I'm not the only person in this room who's looked at a dashboard and thought, look, great, you've harnessed everything for me, but there are 15 pieces of data on here, and there are 15 things I could do tomorrow. So I'll give you an example. So I can't resist the opportunity to take the piss out of Doug. Doug has a dog.
I did not approve this, by the way.
Called Bear. Doug did not endorse this chart.
Yeah.
Doug adores his dog, Bear. I want to sell Doug dog biscuits.
Yeah.
So I go out and I get this wonderful culture dashboard, and what it tells me is that Doug really likes French red wine. Doug likes CrossFit. Doug loves beach travel, likes gluten-free food. Yeah. The Hunger Games, hiking, and he can't hide the fact, because he leaves breadcrumbs everywhere, that he loves Madonna.
I am a child of the 70s and 80s. So.
Indeed. So
yeah.
what I'm trying to do is sell you dog biscuits, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, which one on earth do I do? Do I go and sponsor a Madonna concert with my dog biscuits? Do I go and advertise around his gym with my dog biscuits? What on earth am I supposed to do? Now, this is where everything that Doug said about taking a data center and understanding it at an individual level through media partners really helps us. Because you can use semantic analysis then to start looking at what are the overlaps in culture. When are people most likely to talk about one thing as well as another? Because think about it, none of us has any one particular culture. We've got lots of cultures that overlap. We've been saying this about personal identity for years. I'm not just the me on stage here. I'm someone at home who's, oddly enough, slightly different from the one up here. So where do those overlaps happen? And what you start to see is things hypothetically, such as dog, overlaps more with CrossFit, hiking, and cars than it does with, say, a Madonna concert. So it starts to give you a really exciting, relevant, cultural place where you can add value. And we don't call that marketing into culture. We talk about it as marketing into connected cultures.
And I think what's interesting is, go back. It's a little bit of Back to the Future. When comms planning first started, we talked about contextual relevance, and we talked about being targeted at the right moment, at the right time, with the right message. I think we were a little ahead of our time at some point because the cost to do that and actually land on a piece of content was very expensive. I think where we're at right now is because of those breadcrumbs and our ability to connect those breadcrumbs up to other data sources, and then through semantics start to understand the overlap of those, we're getting very rich understanding of actually the cultural life that these individuals or these cohorts of individuals are leading, which is leading to really exciting storytelling opportunities. And fundamentally, it's transforming the relationship of the media agency.
And what an amazing brief to get. Understanding people better than we've understood them before. Knowing how to serve content through technology better than we've done it before, and all of that serving to build connected cultures.
So I think we actually as an industry have a huge opportunity and also a big responsibility as well, which is to stop leveraging the legacy of what we had been doing for years and years and years, and to really challenge ourselves to think about how we use data and technology to understand people more personally, to make sure that the stories that we're telling are agnostic and work across devices, and then importantly, that we're not interrupting, that we're actually adding value if we're engaging that consumer, very similar to what we saw with Macy's, with PlayStation, or with MasterCard.
And MasterCard. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great stuff, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. I have really insightful learnings there, some great inspiring things that brands are doing. I suppose one question I have is, how hard is it to persuade brands to actually go down this route and utilize this method of communicating with their consumers and kind of, I suppose, putting more of their budget into it? How hard a job is that?
Well, I think like anything, no client is going to make a full-stop change in what they're doing, particularly if things aren't broken. Now, I would argue that we're at a position right now when you look at all the major companies that are traded on major stock markets, that there are very few that are seeing gangbuster results, right? So I would argue that many clients are looking to do things different, to do them better, but I do think we have to take a test and learn approach into things. And so, I think it's much easier for a brand to carve out, it might be on a specific brand, a brand that may be lower risk, it may be a market that actually has more interest in driving innovation. But I think that's the way you've got to approach it, is it's really about a journey, and it's about helping to take those clients along that journey.
So to build on that with what Lindsay was saying earlier in the panel about talent, and the future of the media agency, it is for those of us within agency, it is our job now to help clients take managed risks and to help them to see the evidence that emanate from those risks and the business results they're putting out.
Thank you very much, guys. I'll see if the audience have any questions. We have one right here.
Did we allow questions? I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course. I just threw that bit in for you. That's okay. Thank you, Siri.
Hello, my name is Ludmila. I'm from Philips, so I'm from client sides, and I can reassure you I have full buy-in to what you've just shared with us. But I have a question. What would you expect from the clients to change in the briefing? to how, I guess, to work, now we just cannot start to work like that, yeah? So what we are supposed to change to, how we should brief you differently to have this connected reality happen?
Yep, that's a really, really good question. And I think that there are two things that I would start with. And part of this is about foundational building blocks to some extent. I think, and it comes back to, Jeremy, what you asked, which is clients, taking them on a journey. If clients aren't set up right now, if they still are viewing digital as a silo, where either a separate agency from the agency that's handling perhaps some of their more mass media, if that's handled at a separate agency, I think that's the first thing, is that it's going to be much more difficult, if we're not thinking about it all as one. Yes. So that's the first thing. And part of that is internal structures. A lot of clients are still structured where digital is handled, e-commerce is handled, or website development is handled separately from, let's say, the paid-for advertising. So I think the first is make sure that we're at a point, that we're comfortable with digital being seamlessly a part of those communication solutions. I think the second point then is really starting and talking about the triggers that actually engage consumers in the category first, before we can start to actually talk about the triggers that engage them in culture. So having a very open and honest data conversation in terms of what data do we have available, because many, many clients actually have reams of data that sit within a CRM program that are actually sitting over here, maybe for direct marketing purposes, but today we have a huge opportunity to start to take the direct marketing principles, and I spent a number of years in direct marketing, taking those principles and actually applying them to the traditional mass marketing as well. So I'd say start with making sure that we're integrated and we're thinking collectively about media as one thing, not separating those. And then the second is having a very clear data strategy and data discussion.
And brief everyone together.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
I'm sure you'll agree. What a great double act.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay and Doug. Okay.